Hola, hola, amiga. You are listening to the Best of VLM episode series, which showcases some of the most popular episodes of the Viva la Mami podcast. This episode is one of those. If you enjoy what you hear, make sure you subscribe and don't forget to rate the show and write a review on Apple Podcasts so that other mommies like you can find this podcast. Ahora, let's get into the episode. Hola, hola, Alex. How are you?
Hola, good. I'm good. How are you doing this morning?
I am great. As long as I have a cup of coffee, I feel great.
Yeah, me too. I
This is what
understand
I
that.
need.
I think all parents understand that.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here. I know you as an educator and just like someone that is very involved in the community as well, in the school specifically, being that you work at my son's school, which is amazing. And so you presented on a session about restorative practices and parenting, and I'm like, I need to have Alex on the show because everything that you shared really resonated with me, but especially coming from the Latino perspective and the father perspective, I really wanted you to be here so that you can share your experiences and kind of like your background as well and your transition into this, especially once you became a dad. So, in
Absolutely.
this Father's Day episode, I am really excited to bring the Latino dad perspective because it's so important, especially for those who are raising children where we are intentional in breaking generational cycles, right? So before we delve into the conversation, I would love for you to introduce yourself. If you can tell our listeners a little bit more about your background, your family, and everything in between.
Absolutely. And I think it kind of all ties into, my philosophy being in education. It all has to do with my background from how I was raised to school to work to everything. And so, yeah. So I think the big thing is I'm first generation. My dad's from Cuba. He came over in 1980. Mariel, Mariel boat lift. And then my mom is from Mexico. She's from Michoacan, and they met here in Chicago. And so I think that's a key component of my, like I said, how I deal with kids and even my own children. And so I was born in Chicago, and, we lived here for a while, and then we kind of moved. And then when I was around 5, we moved to the northwest suburbs. We moved to Des Plaines, and then, I lived there. And then I went to Northeastern University for my undergrad. And then I eventually got my master's in, educational leadership. But I taught in Little Village, which is a predominantly Latino neighborhood in Chicago. And I taught there for 8 or 9 years, and I loved it, But, eventually I wanted to kind of move into administrative work. And so I did leave. And then I have been a dean now for 9 years. So in total, I've been in Chicago public schools for 17 years. And then even before that, I was a camp counselor for like 8 years, so overnight camp and all that kind of stuff. So there's that, my professional side. But then the personal side, I do have 2 children of my own. I have a 4-year-old, Violeta, and then I have a 1.5-year-old named Felix. Yeah, and so, I think all those different components, my personal components and the professional ones combined have kind of shaped my philosophy and just how even I deal personally with my kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. First of all, you come from an education background. And the fact that you have been with children, right? You understand their experiences. You are more empathetic, as to why they do the things that they do,
Yeah.
right?
When I talk about the camps and stuff, because people are like, well, why do you always mention camps? And I'm like, honestly, for me as an educator, those early days when I was taking those pedagogy, those college courses, at the same time, I was an overnight, I was doing camps in the summer. And the thing is, I was like, I tell people I'm like the Jane Goodall of teenagers, because when you're at a camp, you live among them, you're in the cabin. So, I think some people, they get their degree and then they kind of jump into the classroom. But while I was studying a lot of these, like I said, the pedagogy and the theories and stuff, I was applying them. I cracked a couple eggs, but being at the camp, you're with the kids constantly. You really start to learn and get to know how they interact and stuff. And so, I think that was definitely where this whole journey, kind of kicked off.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. And especially as you as first gen, you have a unique perspective. I think you could be more understanding towards other students who also come from that background, right? Who are first generation. And as someone who is a product of CPS myself, the Chicago Public Schools, I was able to tell who was understanding of my lived experiences versus those that were not. And that made a huge impact in terms of connecting with educators that really understood where I came from. Like, why is it that I don't know certain systems and why I didn't have the capital compared to other peers? And so that is such a huge piece and component when you're thinking about why is it that some students make certain decisions or, why do they react a certain way versus others? And yeah, that makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times people don't take into perspective the whole student, and so I
Hmm.
do bring that up. So, you know, going to school in Des Plaines, I'm grateful for it and it gave me a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, at least at that time, there were not tons of Latinos in elementary school or middle school, high school, a little bit more. But even then, it was definitely, that's kind of where my journey, also my identity and just, Latinidad is the, quote unquote Latinidad, am I Latino enough? But that's where it began because, I was either, and I know a lot of people experience this, either not, Latino enough for the Latinos or too Latino for the whites and Caucasians. And so it was just kind of code switching is what it,
Yeah.
now I know it's a skill. At the time, I'm like, oh man, oh man. But now I know it's an actual skill called
Right.
code switching, right? Being able
Right.
to have that ability to go between both worlds, both cultures, languages, slang, everything, right? Even,
Yeah.
and so bringing that now to my career and just realizing like, yeah, you see a kid and you realize there's a lot more to that kid. There's a lot more
Hmm.
depth and there's so many things that are affecting them and what's going on.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. Yeah. And we're definitely going to delve into that, but more so on the parent perspective.
For sure.
So, as an educator and a dad, could you share your journey into restorative practices? And first of all, what is that? What
Sure.
is restorative
Yeah.
practice?
So, restorative practices aren't just, it's not just for education. Really, if we want to
Mhm.
take it to this next level, why I became a dean and started becoming interesting in this, we have to, we have to be frank, right? And unfortunately, there's a disproportionate number of people of color, especially males, prison. It's what
Mhm.
we call that pipeline, the
Mhm.
school to prison pipeline,
Mhm.
right? And so, the last 30 years, I would say more or less, there's been a lot of research and just work on how do we prevent that. And so restorative practices began of how do we use different theories and philosophies to get to the root cause of a behavior, right? We know that these things are happening, but instead of we're just going to lock someone up and do that, let's actually get to the root cause. Let's give them help. Let's help rehabilitate, right? Well, taking that and it's like, okay, well, let's really get to the root then. Well, the root
Mhm.
is what kind of foundation, educational foundation are they getting? What kinds of supports? So taking that philosophy of restorative practices or the idea of getting to the root cause of something or focusing on rehabilitation, you take it and you apply to school. So that's kind of a little bit of background
Mhm.
on this term, restorative practices. In terms of my journey, I really feel like there's maybe 3 or 4 kind of milestones or keystones for me, as I was thinking about it. And I think the first thing is my own growth. And I know we can delve into that more because a lot of people ask me, like, okay, my kid is always doing this and they're doing that, or like, what's the secret? What's the magic wand? There's no magic wand, but it starts with you, and people hate hearing that.
Mhm.
And the thing is, I'm not talking like a 5 minute, like, oh, well, okay, I'm going to do this because no, I'm talking therapy. I'm talking lifelong reflection, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, even before I knew what restorative practices were, or even before I knew what education was, When I was starting college and in high school, a lot of it was just like, man, my parents talked to me this certain way, or this is how we communicated. I don't like that. It was
Yeah.
me in my relationships, my college, high school girlfriend, being defensive all the time and
Mm.
realizing, oh, I'm defensive because in my household, when we would argue, it wasn't about coming with a solution. It was about how can I hurt that other person? So at home, we model our communication styles. We model how to have an argument. And so then, me on myself, just thinking about in my interactions with my wife and getting to the root cause of why am I defensive? Why do I, automatically try to turn things and blame her? And why do these things happen? So that's one component. Even before I knew I was doing it, or before I would call it restorative practices, I've always been trying to reflect to better myself, right? That's the first
Mhm.
component. I think the second keystone was when I was a high school teacher in Little Village. I did this curriculum. I was a social science teacher, but once a week, I would do what we call like a social emotional learning, or,
Mm.
a curriculum that focuses on, once again, the whole student, like their well-being, right? And so this particular, coincidentally enough, it was about podcasting, right? But it wasn't really about podcasting. It was about listening. And
Mm.
the key thing being, whether it's a kid or an adult or your spouse, is that listening is not the same as hearing. You can hear a sound, but listening is the processing of that, right?
Yes.
And so when I would do this class with the kids, I would it was a prepackaged lesson. I would do it. But then I sat there and I started like actually participating. And then I started opening up about my background, right, with the
Yeah.
kids. And then what I realized was putting in the time that once a week, it wasn't social science. It wasn't what I was doing the rest of the week. But on Fridays, doing that, the other 4 days, those students were ready to do what I asked them. And it's because we made that connection. And so that kind of clicked, because then I'm like, okay, there's something to focusing on the root cause. There's something to taking time out and just talking to the kids and making that connection. Them seeing me as human, me seeing them as human, and then making connections and then tying it to that first component of my
Mhm.
own reflection. Because it was literally through that teaching that class that I started my own growth as to why I was how I was in my relationships. The
Yeah.
importance of listening, the importance of sometimes not speaking.
Yeah. Y con eso, that's where we're wrapping up this best of VLM episode. But don't worry, this is just a little taste. If you nodded along, had an aha moment, or felt seen as a modern Latina mama, then go listen to the full episode. There is so much more waiting for you, and you deserve all of it. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please take a moment to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It means the world to me, and it helps other mamás just like you discover this comunidad. All right, amiga. Well, thank you so much for being here. Hasta la próxima. And now go get that full episode.